My lawyer handed me a $48 million inheritance with one terrifying condition: discover which of my 3 children had tried to poison me 6 months earlier or lose everything. The will stated that my late husband knew one of them was a would-be killer, but he died before he could tell me which one. What I uncovered about my own family left me questioning everything I thought I knew about motherhood, and the confrontation that followed changed all our lives forever. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. At 70 years old, I thought the hardest part of my life was behind me. My name is Evangeline Thornfield, and after burying my husband Augustus 3 months earlier, I believed I was finally settling into the quiet twilight years in our sprawling estate in the hills of Montecito, California. The Mediterranean-style mansion, with its terracotta tiles and olive groves, had been our sanctuary for 35 years. Now it felt like a mausoleum, too big and too quiet for one grieving widow. Augustus and I had built our fortune together through his pharmaceutical empire, Thornfield Biotech, which he'd grown from a small research lab into a multinational corporation worth hundreds of millions. We'd raised 3 children in this house, watching them grow from toddlers playing in the infinity pool to adults with their own complicated lives and expensive problems. Our eldest, Maximilian, now 46, had inherited his father's brilliant mind but channeled it into the volatile world of cryptocurrency and blockchain technology. His company, Nexus Digital, operated out of a gleaming tower in downtown San Francisco, and Max lived like a tech mogul should: penthouse apartment, Tesla collection, and a rotating cast of much younger girlfriends who seemed more interested in his bank account than his personality. Despite his success, he was always hungry for more capital to fund his increasingly ambitious and risky ventures. Our middle child, Serafina, 43, had taken a different path entirely. After graduating summa cum laude from Harvard Law, she'd built one of the most prestigious family law practices on the West Coast. Her Beverly Hills office handled the divorces of celebrities and tech billionaires, earning her millions in fees and a reputation for ruthless efficiency. Her own divorce 5 years earlier had been spectacularly nasty, leaving her bitter and seemingly determined to prove that all relationships were transactional. She lived alone in a stark, modern house in the Hollywood Hills, all glass and steel with no warmth anywhere. Then there was our youngest, Cassius, 39, the charming disappointment who'd never quite found his footing in life. Unlike his siblings, Cass had chosen to pursue art, opening a gallery in Santa Barbara specializing in contemporary sculpture and installation pieces. The problem was that Cass had more taste than business sense, and his gallery barely broke even despite featuring increasingly expensive pieces. He lived above the gallery in a converted loft, always one financial crisis away from asking his parents for another bailout. I loved all 3 of my children deeply, but I wasn't blind to their flaws. Max's hunger for money sometimes overrode his judgment. Sarah's coldness had only grown worse since her divorce, and she seemed to view every relationship through the lens of what she could gain from it. And Cass, sweet Cass, had never learned to take responsibility for his own financial mistakes, always counting on family money to rescue him from his latest poor decision. But I never imagined that one of them might want me dead. The call from Augustus's estate attorney came on a drizzly Tuesday morning in late October. I was sitting in the breakfast nook overlooking the gardens, picking at a bowl of oatmeal while reading the Santa Barbara news press, when the phone rang. "Mrs. Thornfield, this is Harrison Blackwell from Blackwell Morrison & Associates. I need you to come to the office today. There's something in Augustus's will that requires immediate attention." Harrison had been our family attorney for over 20 years, handling everything from business contracts to our estate planning. His voice carried an unusual tension that made my stomach clench with anxiety. "Is there a problem with the will?" I asked, setting down my coffee cup with trembling fingers. "It's complicated. I think it's best if we discuss this in person. Can you be here by 2 p.m.? The drive to downtown Santa Barbara took 45 minutes through winding canyon roads lined with eucalyptus trees and million-dollar homes. The Blackwell firm occupied the top floor of a Spanish colonial building near the courthouse, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. I'd been here dozens of times over the years for various legal matters, but today, the familiar surroundings felt ominous. Harrison met me in the lobby personally, which was unusual. He was a distinguished man in his late 60s, with silver hair and the kind of expensive suit that spoke of decades serving wealthy clients. But today, his usually composed demeanor seemed strange. "Evangeline," he said, embracing me briefly, "thank you for coming so quickly. This is, well, it's unprecedented in my career." He led me to his corner office where afternoon sunlight streamed through windows over the harbor. Sailboats dotted the blue water below, their white sails catching the breeze like tiny birds. It was a peaceful scene that contrasted sharply with the turmoil I was about to experience. "Before we begin," Harrison said, settling behind his mahogany desk, "I want you to know that I argued with Augustus about this. I told him there had to be a better way to handle the situation, but he was adamant about following this course of action." My heart began to race. "What situation? Harrison, you're scaring me." He opened a leather portfolio and withdrew a thick document, along with a sealed envelope bearing my name in Augustus's familiar handwriting. The envelope was heavier than normal stationery, sealed with red wax that bore the imprint of Augustus's signet ring. The majority of Augustus's estate, approximately $48 million in liquid assets, plus the Montecito property and his remaining shares in Thornfield Biotech, goes to you, as expected. But there's a condition attached to the inheritance. He slid the envelope across the polished surface of his desk. "Augustus insisted that you read this letter alone, in my presence, before I could explain the terms of the will." With shaking hands, I broke the wax seal. The paper inside was Augustus's personal letterhead, heavy cream stock with his monogram embossed at the top. His handwriting, usually bold and confident, seemed more careful here, as if he'd chosen each word with extraordinary deliberation. "My dearest Evangeline, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and I pray you'll forgive me for the burden I'm about to place on your shoulders. I tried to find another way to handle this, but time ran out before I could solve the problem myself. 6 months ago, someone tried to kill you. The illness you suffered after your 70th birthday dinner, the violent sickness that sent you to cottage hospital for 3 days, wasn't food poisoning, as the doctors concluded. You were deliberately poisoned. I discovered this by accident 3 weeks after your hospitalization. While paying bills, I noticed unusual purchases on several of our credit cards. Chemical compounds, laboratory equipment, and medical supplies that none of us had any legitimate reason to buy. The purchases were made under family member names, using cards they had legitimate access to. I began investigating quietly, using private resources to trace the purchases and examine what happened that night. What I learned horrified me beyond anything I could have imagined. One of our children, our own flesh and blood, orchestrated a calculated attempt to end your life. I have evidence, but I died before I could determine which of Maximilian, Serafina, or Cassius is guilty. The investigation I began uncovered 3 separate suspicious patterns, and any one of our children could be the perpetrator. The inheritance comes with this condition: you must discover which of our children tried to murder you. Only when you know the truth and can provide definitive proof to Harrison should you claim your inheritance. If you choose not to pursue this investigation, the money will go to charity, and our children will inherit nothing. I couldn't bear to tell you this while I was alive. It would have destroyed you to live with such suspicion. But you deserve to know which of our children sees you as an obstacle to their financial future rather than the mother who gave them life. The evidence I gathered is hidden in the place that means the most to you and me, somewhere only you would think to look. Start with the beginning of our life together and follow the path we built. I know this seems impossible to believe. I know you'll want to dismiss this as the paranoid fantasy of a sick old man. But Evangeline, our child tried to kill you, and they may try again if they think you're getting closer to the truth. Trust no one in our family until you know which one betrayed you. Our love was real, but one of them sees you only as a barrier to wealth they feel entitled to inherit. Find the truth, my darling. You're stronger than you know, and you deserve to live your remaining years without the threat of someone who should love you unconditionally. All my love, always, Augustus. P.S. If something happens to you during this investigation, Harrison has instructions to turn everything over to the FBI. You won't be facing this alone. The letter slipped from my numb fingers and fluttered to the carpet. Harrison retrieved it quickly, his expression grave and sympathetic. Evangeline, I'm so sorry. I know how shocking this must be. I stared at him, my mind struggling to process what I'd just read. The words seemed to float in the air between us, too monstrous to be real. One of my children tried to poison me? According to Augustus, yes. He spent months investigating before his death, and he left detailed files about what he'd discovered, and he also retained a private investigator who's been keeping the evidence secure. My hands were shaking so violently that I had to clasp them together in my lap. The birthday dinner 6 months ago came flooding back with terrifying clarity. It had been a beautiful evening in early April, one of those perfect Santa Barbara nights when the temperature was exactly right and the ocean breeze carried the scent of jasmine from our garden. I had insisted on cooking the entire meal myself, a traditional Sunday dinner with roast beef, Yorkshire pudding, roasted vegetables, and my famous chocolate trifle for dessert. All 3 children had come, along with Max's latest girlfriend, a 28-year-old yoga instructor named Sky who spent most of the evening taking selfies. Max had brought wine, an expensive Bordeaux that he'd been saving for a special occasion. Sarah had contributed her signature appetizer, bacon-wrapped scallops that she'd learned to make in culinary school before deciding on law instead. And Cass had helped me serve everything, being unusually attentive and helpful, constantly refilling water glasses and clearing plates. We'd eaten on the terrace, overlooking the ocean, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. It had been perfect, or so I'd thought. By 9 p.m., I was feeling nauseated. By 10 p.m., I was vomiting uncontrollably. By midnight, I was in the emergency room at Cottage Hospital, severely dehydrated and confused. The doctors ran every test imaginable: blood work, stool samples, CT scans. They found nothing definitive. Food poisoning, they finally concluded. Sometimes these things just happen, especially with dairy-based desserts in warm weather. I'd spent 3 days in the hospital, weak and disoriented, while my children took turns visiting and expressing their concern. Now I realized that one of them had been sitting by my bedside, holding my hand and offering comfort, while knowing they had caused my suffering. "The evidence," Augustus mentioned, I managed to whisper. "Do you know where it is?" He said you'd know where to look. Something about starting with the beginning of your life together. Harrison leaned forward, his voice gentle but concerned. "Evangeline, before you make any decisions about this, I want you to understand what you'd be committing to. This investigation could destroy your family relationships forever, even if you discover the guilty party. Are you prepared for that possibility?" I thought about my 3 children, trying to imagine any of them capable of murder. Max, with his ruthless business instincts and constant need for capital. Sarah, who had grown cold and calculating since her divorce, viewing every relationship as a transaction. Cass, charming but desperate, always needing money for his next failing venture. Which one had looked across our family dinner table on my 70th birthday and decided I was worth more dead than alive? "What happens if I choose not to investigate?" I asked. "The $48 million goes to the American Cancer Society, per Augustus's instructions. Your children would receive token amounts, $50,000 each, and that's all. The house would be sold and the proceeds donated as well." I closed my eyes, trying to imagine just walking away from this nightmare. I could take the $50,000 meant for each child, leave Montecito, and start over somewhere far away. But the thought of living the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, never knowing which of my children was a killer, seemed unbearable. And there was something else, a growing anger that surprised me with its intensity. Someone had tried to murder me in my own home, on my birthday, using a celebration of my life as cover for ending it. That person was still out there, still part of my family, still pretending to love me while planning God knows what. "I need to know the truth," I said. my voice stronger than I felt. Harrison nodded slowly. I was afraid you'd say that. Augustus left specific instructions for this scenario. He opened another folder and withdrew a business card. This is Elena Vasquez, the private investigator Augustus hired. She's been maintaining surveillance and gathering evidence for the past 3 months. She's expecting your call. As I drove home that afternoon, my mind raced through every interaction I'd had with my children since that terrible night 6 months ago. Had there been signs I'd missed? Moments when one of them had seemed guilty or nervous? Or had they been so coldly calculating that they'd shown no remorse at all? The sun was setting as I pulled through the gates of our estate, casting long shadows across the circular driveway. The house looked the same as always, welcoming, warm, the kind of place where families gathered for holidays and celebrations. But now it felt different, tainted by the knowledge that someone who should love me had tried to kill me here. I parked in the garage and sat for a long moment in the silence, trying to gather the courage to enter the house where I'd nearly died. When I finally walked through the kitchen door, my eyes immediately went to the dining room, where we'd shared that fateful birthday meal. The long mahogany table could seat 12 comfortably, and I'd set it with our best china that night, the spode Christmas tree pattern that had been a wedding gift from Augustus's mother. I could still see us all sitting there, laughing and talking, while one of my children waited for the poison to take effect. My phone rang, making me jump. The caller ID showed Sarah's name. "Hi, Mom. I was just thinking about you. How are you holding up?" Her voice was warm and concerned, exactly what I'd expect from a loving daughter checking on her widowed mother. But now I heard something else underneath. Was it calculation? Guilt? Or was my paranoia making me imagine things that weren't there? "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just getting used to the quiet. I worry about you in that big house all alone. Maybe you should consider moving somewhere smaller, closer to civilization. You could get a condo in Santa Barbara, something modern and easy to maintain." Was she genuinely concerned? Or was she trying to get me to sell the house so she could access her inheritance faster? The doubt was already poisoning everything. "I'm not ready to make any big changes yet," I said carefully. "Of course not. But Mom, if you ever need anything at all, you know you can call me, right? I love you," I replied automatically, but the words felt strange in my mouth. How do you tell someone you love them when you're not sure they tried to kill you? After hanging up, I walked to Augustus's study, a wood-paneled room lined with medical textbooks and pharmaceutical journals. His desk was still covered with papers from his final projects, and his reading glasses lay folded beside a half-finished crossword puzzle. This had been his sanctuary, the place where he'd conducted the investigation that revealed our family's darkest secret. My phone rang, making me jump. The caller ID showed Sarah's name. "Hi, Mom. I was just thinking about you. How are you holding up?" Her voice was warm and concerned, exactly what I'd expect from a loving daughter checking on her widowed mother. But now I heard something else underneath. Was it calculation? Guilt? Or was my paranoia making me imagine things that weren't there? "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just getting used to the quiet. I worry about you in that big house all alone. Maybe you should consider moving somewhere smaller, closer to civilization. You could get a condo in Santa Barbara, something modern and easy to maintain." Was she genuinely concerned? Or was she trying to get me to sell the house so she could access her inheritance faster? The doubt was already poisoning everything. "I'm not ready to make any big changes yet," I said carefully. "Of course not. But Mom, if you ever need anything at all, you know you can call me, right? I love you." "I love you too," I replied automatically, but the words felt strange in my mouth. How do you tell someone you love them when you're not sure if they tried to kill you? After hanging up, I walked to Augustus's study, a wood-paneled room lined with medical textbooks and pharmaceutical journals. His desk was still covered with papers from his final projects, and his reading glasses lay folded beside a half-finished crossword puzzle. This had been his sanctuary, the place where he'd conducted the investigation that revealed our family's darkest secret. I sat in his leather chair and tried to think like he would have. Where would he hide evidence that only I would find? What did he mean by the beginning of our life together? Then it hit me, the wine cellar. Augustus and I had built the wine collection together over 30 years, traveling to vineyards around the world and carefully selecting bottles for special occasions. The cellar was in the basement, climate-controlled and organized with the obsessive precision that Augustus brought to everything he cared about. We'd opened our first bottle of champagne there the night we'd moved into the house, christening our new home with Dom Perignon 1985. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and headed downstairs. The wine cellar was dark and cool, filled with hundreds of bottles arranged in wooden racks that stretched from floor to ceiling. I walked slowly through the narrow aisles, looking for anything that seemed out of place. In the far corner, behind a rack of vintage burgundies, I found it, a small fireproof safe that I'd never seen before, tucked behind bottles that hadn't been moved in years. The combination lock was digital, requiring a 6-digit code. I tried our wedding date first, 051875, but nothing happened. Then our anniversary, Augustus's birthday, my birthday. Nothing worked. I was about to give up when I remembered the champagne we'd shared on our first night in the house, Dom Perignon 1985. I entered 051985 and heard the soft click of the lock disengaging. Inside the safe were 3 thick manila folders, each labeled with one of my children's names. There was also a letter addressed to me and a USB drive marked Security Footage, April 12th. April 12th, my birthday. With trembling hands, I opened Augustus's letter. If you found this, then you've decided to pursue the truth. I'm proud of your courage, but terrified for your safety. Each folder contains evidence that could implicate one of our children. The patterns are subtle but damning. The USB drive contains security footage from our home cameras that night, footage that shows something disturbing, but not definitively enough to identify the perpetrator. Be careful who you trust. The killer is intelligent and ruthless enough to poison their own mother. They won't hesitate to strike again if they feel threatened. Start with the folders, but don't confront anyone until you have absolute proof. One of our children is a murderer, and they're still living among us, waiting for another opportunity. I carried everything upstairs to Augustus's study and spread the folders across his desk. Outside, the sun had set completely, and the house felt vast and empty around me. Somewhere out there, one of my children was going about their evening routine, maybe having dinner, watching television, or getting ready for bed, while I sat alone, trying to figure out which one of them had tried to kill me. The investigation was about to begin, and I had no idea what horrors I was about to uncover about the family I thought I knew. But one thing was certain, I was going to find the truth, no matter how much it destroyed us all. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every shadow in the house seemed to hide a threat. Every creak of the old wooden beams made me wonder if someone was moving through the darkness. I sat in Augustus's study until dawn, poring over the 3 folders he'd left behind, each one containing evidence that could implicate one of my children in attempted murder. The morning light streaming through the windows felt surreal as I made coffee with shaking hands. Everything looked normal. The kitchen where I'd prepared countless family meals, the breakfast nook where Augustus and I had shared our morning routine for 35 years, the view of the gardens that had always brought me peace. But nothing would ever be normal again. At 8 a.m. sharp, I called the number Harrison had given me for Elena Vasquez, the private investigator Augustus had hired. Her voice was crisp and professional, with just a hint of a Spanish accent. Mrs. Thornfield, I've been expecting your call. I'm sorry for your loss, and I'm sorry about the circumstances that bring us together. What exactly did my husband tell you? I asked, still struggling to believe this was real. Everything, the poisoning, his suspicions about your children, the evidence he'd gathered. He hired me 3 months before his death to continue the investigation and protect the evidence he'd compiled. I've been watching your family discreetly ever since. The thought that someone had been watching my children, documenting their movements and activities, made me feel sick. But if one of them was a killer, maybe surveillance was the only way to prevent another attempt. Can you come to the house today? I need to understand what we're dealing with. I'll be there at 2 p.m. Don't tell anyone about our meeting. Not your children, not friends, no one. If the perpetrator realizes you're investigating, they may accelerate their timeline. After hanging up, I forced myself to eat breakfast and tried to think clearly about what I'd learned from Augustus's folders. Each child had been under some form of financial pressure around the time of my poisoning, and each had access to the means and opportunity to carry out the attempt.
Maximilian's folder was the thickest. Augustus had documented Max's increasingly risky investments in cryptocurrency and blockchain technology. His company, Nexus Digital, had been hemorrhaging money on a failed project involving digital currencies for developing nations. The folder contained bank statements showing massive personal loans Max had taken against his future inheritance, as well as emails between him and potential investors who were growing impatient for returns. One email in particular made my blood run cold. It was from a venture capital firm in Silicon Valley, dated 2 weeks before my birthday dinner. Max, our patience is wearing thin. The $15 million you borrowed against your family inheritance was predicated on your assurance that the funds would be available within 6 months. We're now past that deadline with no tangible progress on your blockchain project. If you cannot provide the inheritance funds by June 1st, we'll have no choice but to pursue collection through alternative means. Our clients don't accept failure lightly. The implication was clear. Max had borrowed against money he didn't yet have, using his expected inheritance as collateral. If I lived to collect the full estate, there might not be enough left for him to repay his debts. But if I died before claiming the inheritance, he would inherit immediately and have access to the funds he desperately needed. Serafina's folder painted a different but equally troubling picture. Despite her successful law practice, Sarah had been bleeding money since her divorce. Her ex-husband had been awarded half of everything in their settlement, including their investment portfolio and vacation properties. Augustus had tracked her spending through credit card records and bank statements that showed a woman living far beyond her means. The most damning evidence was a series of consultations she'd had with estate planning attorneys in Los Angeles. The invoices showed she'd been researching inheritance law, specifically focusing on what happens when a beneficiary dies before claiming their inheritance. She'd paid $25,000 for legal advice about accelerating inheritance distributions and the tax implications of inherited wealth. But it was a handwritten note in Augustus's tearful script that made my hands tremble. Sarah asked me about my will provisions 3 times in the past year. Each time she specifically wanted to know what would happen to Evangeline's inheritance if something happened to her. I told her it would be distributed equally among the children. She seemed very interested in this scenario. Had my own daughter been planning my death for over a year? Cassius's folder was smaller, but no less disturbing. My youngest son's art gallery was failing spectacularly. Augustus had discovered that Cass owed over $300,000 to various creditors, including some very unsavory characters who weren't content to wait for payment. There were copies of threatening letters, documentation of his gambling debts, and evidence that he'd been stealing from the gallery's consignment artist to pay his most pressing bills. The folder included photographs that Augustus had somehow obtained showing Cass meeting with a man identified as Vincent Torino, a known loan shark with connections to organized crime. The photos were dated just 1 month before my birthday dinner. The accompanying notes indicated that Cass had borrowed $150,000 from Torino at an interest rate that would make the debt impossible to repay through legitimate means. At the bottom of Cass's folder was a receipt that made me feel physically ill. It was from a chemical supply company in Los Angeles, dated 1 week before my birthday. The purchaser was listed as C. Thornfield, and the items included sodium fluoroacetate, a colorless, odorless poison that mimics the symptoms of food poisoning. I sat back in Augustus's chair, overwhelmed by the evidence spread before me. Any one of my children could be guilty. They all had motive, means, and opportunity. But which one had actually gone through with it? The security footage might hold the answer. I inserted the USB drive into Augustus's computer with trembling fingers. The file contained multiple camera angles from our birthday dinner, including views of the kitchen, dining room, and terrace where we'd eaten. Watching myself celebrate my 70th birthday while knowing someone was trying to kill me was surreal and horrifying. I fast-forwarded through the early part of the evening, focusing on moments when someone could have tampered with my food or drink. The cameras showed Max arriving first, carrying 2 bottles of expensive wine. He went directly to the kitchen and spent several minutes alone there while I was upstairs changing clothes. I watched him open one of the wine bottles and set it aside to breathe, but the camera angle didn't show if he added anything to it. Sarah arrived 30 minutes later with her signature appetizers already prepared. She placed the covered dish in the refrigerator and helped herself to a glass of water. But again, the camera angles were frustratingly incomplete. I could see her moving around the kitchen, but not clearly enough to determine if she was doing anything suspicious. Cass was the last to arrive, and he immediately offered to help with the final preparations. The footage showed him being unusually attentive, constantly moving between the kitchen and dining room, carrying plates and glasses, refilling water pitchers. He had more opportunity than the others to tamper with food or drinks, but the cameras never caught him in an obviously incriminating act.
The most disturbing part of the footage was watching myself become progressively ill as the evening wore on. I could see the exact moment when the nausea hit, the way my face went pale, how I excused myself from the table, and I could see my children's reactions. Max looking concerned but distracted, Serafina immediately taking charge and calling for medical help, Cass holding my hand and looking genuinely terrified. If one of them was acting, they deserved an Academy Award. By the time Elena Vasquez arrived at 2 p.m., I felt like I was drowning in suspicion and doubt. She was a compact woman in her 40s with intelligent dark eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She carried a leather briefcase and moved with the confident efficiency of someone accustomed to dealing with dangerous situations. Madam Thornfield, before we begin, I need you to understand the gravity of what we're dealing with. Your husband believed that whoever tried to poison you will try again if they realize you're investigating. We need to be extremely careful about how we proceed. She opened her briefcase and withdrew a thick file. I've been conducting surveillance on all 3 of your children for the past 3 months. What I've observed has been concerning. Elena spread out a series of photographs on Augustus's desk. They showed each of my children going about their daily routines, but she'd focused on activities that seemed suspicious or out of character. Maximilian has been meeting regularly with individuals connected to international money laundering operations. His business is in much worse shape than he's admitted to anyone. Last week, I observed him purchasing a new identity document from a forger in Los Angeles. He may be planning to flee the country. The photographs showed Max in restaurants and parking garages, always meeting with shifty-looking men in expensive suits. In one image, he was clearly exchanging an envelope for a small package. Serafina has been researching untraceable poisons. I followed her to 3 different chemical supply companies in the past month. She's been using false identities and paying cash for purchases that include several substances that could be used to harm someone. Elena showed me receipts and surveillance photos of Sarah entering buildings that housed chemical supply companies. In one photo, she was wearing a wig and sunglasses, clearly trying to disguise her appearance. And Cassius has been in contact with people who specialize in making problems disappear permanently. The man he's been meeting with, Vincent Torino, doesn't just loan money. He also provides services for people who need to eliminate obstacles to collecting debts. The photos of Cass were the most frightening. They showed him in increasingly desperate situations, being cornered by threatening-looking men, handing over what appeared to be cash payments, looking terrified and overwhelmed. Mrs. Thornfield, I have to ask, have any of your children behaved differently toward you since your husband's death? Any unusual attention or sudden concern for your welfare? I thought about the phone calls, the visits, the way each of them had been checking on me more frequently since Augustus died. I'd attributed it to normal concern for their grieving mother. But now I wondered if there was a more sinister motive. They've all been more attentive, I admitted, more concerned about my living alone, my health, my daily routines. That's what I was afraid of. In cases like this, the perpetrator often increases their surveillance of the intended victim while planning their next attempt. They need to know your patterns, your vulnerabilities, your moments of greatest isolation. She pulled out another set of documents.
I've also been investigating the original poisoning attempt. The chemical that was used, sodium fluoroacetate, is extremely difficult to obtain legally. Only licensed researchers and pest control companies can purchase it. And even then, it requires extensive documentation and background checks. She showed me a list of everyone in the Santa Barbara area who had purchased the chemical in the past year. My heart sank when I saw familiar names on the list. Your son Cassius purchased it through his art gallery, claiming he needed it for pest control in his warehouse space. Your daughter Serafina obtained it through a contact at her law firm who handles environmental litigation. And your son Maximilian has access to it through his connections to pharmaceutical research companies. I stared at the evidence, feeling hopeless. So any of them could have done it. We're no closer to identifying the real culprit. Actually, we are closer than you think. The key is understanding not just who had access to the poison, but who knew exactly how to administer it in a way that would mimic food poisoning. The dosage had to be precisely calculated, enough to make you seriously ill, but not so much that it would be immediately recognized as poisoning. She opened her laptop and showed me a detailed analysis that Augustus had commissioned from a toxicology expert. The amount of poison you ingested suggests someone with knowledge of pharmacology and human metabolism. They knew exactly how much would send you to the hospital without immediately killing you or being detected in routine blood tests. This level of sophistication narrows down our list of suspects significantly. What are you saying?
The most disturbing part of the footage was watching myself become progressively ill as the evening wore on. I could see the exact moment when the nausea hit, the way my face went pale, how I excused myself from the table, and I could see my children's reactions. Max looking concerned but distracted, Serafina immediately taking charge and calling for medical help, Cass holding my hand and looking genuinely terrified. If one of them was acting, they deserved an Academy Award. By the time Elena Vasquez arrived at 2 p.m., I felt like I was drowning in suspicion and doubt. She was a compact woman in her 40s with intelligent dark eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She carried a leather briefcase and moved with the confident efficiency of someone accustomed to dealing with dangerous situations. Madam Thornfield, before we begin, I need you to understand the gravity of what we're dealing with. Your husband believed that whoever tried to poison you will try again if they realize you're investigating. We need to be extremely careful about how we proceed. She opened her briefcase and withdrew a thick file. I've been conducting surveillance on all 3 of your children for the past 3 months. What I've observed has been concerning. Elena spread out a series of photographs on Augustus's desk. They showed each of my children going about their daily routines, but she'd focused on activities that seemed suspicious or out of character. Maximilian has been meeting regularly with individuals connected to international money laundering operations. His business is in much worse shape than he's admitted to anyone. Last week, I observed him purchasing a new identity document from a forger in Los Angeles. He may be planning to flee the country. The photographs showed Max in restaurants and parking garages, always meeting with shifty-looking men in expensive suits. In one image, he was clearly exchanging an envelope for a small package. Serafina has been researching untraceable poisons. I followed her to 3 different chemical supply companies in the past month. She's been using false identities and paying cash for purchases that include several substances that could be used to harm someone. Elena showed me receipts and surveillance photos of Sarah entering buildings that housed chemical supply companies. In one photo, she was wearing a wig and sunglasses, clearly trying to disguise her appearance. And Cassius has been in contact with people who specialize in making problems disappear permanently. The man he's been meeting with, Vincent Torino, doesn't just loan money. He also provides services for people who need to eliminate obstacles to collecting debts. The photos of Cass were the most frightening. They showed him in increasingly desperate situations,
being cornered by threatening-looking men, handing over what appeared to be cash payments, looking terrified and overwhelmed. Mrs. Thornfield, I have to ask, have any of your children behaved differently toward you since your husband's death? Any unusual attention or sudden concern for your welfare? I thought about the phone calls, the visits, the way each of them had been checking on me more frequently since Augustus died. I'd attributed it to normal concern for their grieving mother. But now I wondered if there was a more sinister motive. They've all been more attentive, I admitted, more concerned about my living alone, my health, my daily routines. That's what I was afraid of. In cases like this, the perpetrator often increases their surveillance of the intended victim while planning their next attempt. They need to know your patterns, your vulnerabilities, your moments of greatest isolation. She pulled out another set of documents. I've also been investigating the original poisoning attempt. The chemical that was used, sodium fluoroacetate, is extremely difficult to obtain legally. Only licensed researchers and pest control companies can purchase it. And even then, it requires extensive documentation and background checks. She showed me a list of everyone in the Santa Barbara area who had purchased the chemical in the past year. My heart sank when I saw familiar names on the list. Your son Cassius purchased it through his art gallery, claiming he needed it for pest control in his warehouse space. Your daughter Serafina obtained it through contact at her law firm who handles environmental litigation. And your son Maximilian has access to it through his connections to pharmaceutical research companies. I stared at the evidence, feeling hopeless. So any of them could have done it. We're no closer to identifying the real culprit. Actually, we are closer than you think. The key is understanding not just who had access to the poison, but who knew exactly how to administer it in a way that would mimic food poisoning. The dosage had to be precisely calculated, enough to make you seriously ill, but not so much that it would be immediately recognized as poisoning. She opened her laptop and showed me a detailed analysis that Augustus had commissioned from a toxicology expert. The amount of poison you ingested suggests someone with knowledge of pharmacology and human metabolism. They knew exactly how much would send you to the hospital without immediately killing you or being detected in routine blood tests. This level of sophistication narrows down our list of suspects significantly. What are you saying?
I'm saying that whoever poisoned you has medical or scientific training. They understood the chemical properties of the toxin and how it would interact with your body. This wasn't a crime of passion or desperation. It was carefully planned by someone with expertise. I thought about my children's backgrounds. Max had a degree in biochemistry before moving into technology. Sarah had taken pre-med courses in college before switching to law. Cass had studied chemistry as part of his art conservation training. Any of them could have the knowledge needed to calculate a precise dosage. There's something else, Elena continued. I've been monitoring your children's communications, and there's been an increase in coded conversations between them since your husband's death. They're planning something, and I don't think it's a surprise party. She showed me transcripts of text messages and email exchanges that had been filtered through encryption software. The messages themselves seemed innocuous: discussions about family get-togethers, concern for my well-being, suggestions about my future living arrangements. But Elena had identified patterns that suggested hidden meanings. When Maximilian texts about taking care of Mom's garden, he's actually discussing timeline and logistics. When Serafina mentions spring cleaning, she's referring to elimination of evidence. And when Cassius talks about the family reunion, he's setting a deadline for action. The room felt like it was spinning around me. My children weren't just individual suspects. They were potentially collaborating in planning my murder. Are you saying they're all involved? I'm saying that one of them is the primary perpetrator, and the others may be providing support or cover. It's possible they've convinced each other that eliminating you is the only way to solve their individual financial problems. Elena closed her laptop and looked at me with sympathy and determination. Mrs. Thornfield, I need you to make a decision. We can continue gathering evidence while keeping you safe, but eventually we'll need to force their hand to identify the primary culprit. Are you prepared for a confrontation that could destroy your family forever?" I looked around Augustus's study, at the photographs of our children on his desk, at the diplomas and awards that represented a lifetime of achievement and respectability. In a few short days, my understanding of my family had been completely shattered. The children I'd raised, loved, and sacrificed for had become strangers capable of murder. But I thought about Augustus's words in his letter. "You deserve to live your remaining years without the threat of someone who should love you unconditionally." What do you recommend? We set a trap. We make them believe you're getting close to the truth, and we see which one panics first. The guilty party will reveal themselves through their actions. Elena pulled out a detailed plan she'd been developing. "In 3 days, you're going to call a family meeting. You'll tell your children that you've discovered some disturbing information about your birthday dinner and that you want to discuss it with all of them present. We'll have the house under complete surveillance, and we'll see which one tries to prevent that meeting from happening." The plan was terrifying, but logical. By forcing the killer to act, we could identify them before they had another chance to strike. What if they all show up to the meeting? What if the guilty one doesn't panic? Then we'll have to take more direct action. But Mrs. Thornfield, I've been doing this for 15 years, and in my experience, killers can't resist the opportunity to control the narrative. Whoever tried to poison you will want to be in that room to gauge how much you know and influence your conclusions. I spent the rest of the afternoon going over Elena's surveillance plan. She would position cameras and recording equipment throughout the house, monitor all communications between my children, and have backup agents ready to intervene if the situation became dangerous. That evening, I sat alone in the dining room where we'd shared my last birthday dinner as an intact family. The mahogany table that had hosted so many celebrations now felt like a crime scene. I could picture each of my children sitting in their usual spots, Max at the head of the table opposite me, Sarah to my right, Cass to my left. One of them had watched me eat poisoned food while making casual conversation about my birthday plans. The house felt different now, charged with menace and possibility. Every room held memories of my children growing up, but also potential evidence of their betrayal. The kitchen where I'd taught them to cook, the living room where we'd celebrated Christmas mornings, the garden where they'd played as children and learned to trust their mother to keep them safe. Now, I was the one who needed protection from them. I called Maximilian first, keeping my voice steady and casual. "Hi, sweetheart. How are you doing?" "Mom, I'm glad you called. I've been worried about you. How are you handling everything with Dad's estate?" The question seemed innocent enough, but I detected an undertone of urgency. Was he anxious about the inheritance, or was I becoming paranoid? "That's actually why I'm calling. I need to speak with you and your siblings about some things. Can you come to dinner this Friday evening? I'd like to have the whole family together." There was a pause. "Discovered? What kind of things?" "I'd rather discuss it when we're all together. It's important, Max. Can you be here?" "Of course. Is everything all right? You sound stressed."
I'm fine. Just some paperwork issues that affect all of you. Friday at 7 p.m.? I'll be there. The conversation with Serafina followed a similar pattern. She agreed to come, but pressed for details about what I wanted to discuss. I could hear the attorney in her voice, probing for information while trying to sound casually concerned. Cassius was the most direct. "Mom, you're scaring me. What did you find? Is it about Dad's business? The house?" "Friday night, Cass. We'll talk about everything then." "Can't you give me a hint? I hate waiting when I know something's wrong." His distress seemed genuine, but I reminded myself that Cass had always been the best actor in the family. As a child, he could fake illness so convincingly that I'd rush him to the doctor, only to discover there was nothing wrong. After making the calls, I sat in Augustus's study and tried to prepare myself mentally for what was coming. In 3 days, I would face my children knowing that one of them had tried to kill me.
I would look into their eyes, listen to their voices, and watch their body language, searching for the truth that would either destroy or vindicate each of them. Elena had been right about one thing. Whoever was guilty wouldn't be able to resist attending the meeting. They would need to be there to control the situation, to gauge how much I knew, and possibly to plan their next move. The thought that one of my children might use the family meeting as an opportunity for another murder attempt made my blood run cold. But Augustus had left me a choice: live in fear for the rest of my life, or find the truth and face the consequences. I was 70 years old, and I'd already survived one murder attempt. If my own child wanted to try again, at least this time I'd be ready for them. The trap was set. Now, I just had to survive long enough to spring it. The 3 days between arranging the family meeting and Friday evening passed like a slow-motion nightmare. Every phone call from my children made me jump. Every unexpected sound in the house sent my heart racing. Elena had installed hidden cameras and listening devices throughout the estate, transforming my home into a high-tech surveillance operation that felt more like a fortress under siege. Wednesday morning brought the first sign that my investigation was having an effect. I was tending to the rose garden when I noticed a black sedan parked across the street from our gates. It had been there for over an hour, and through the tinted windows, I could make out the silhouette of someone watching the house. I called Elena immediately. "There's a car outside. Someone's watching me." "I see it on our remote monitors. That's Vincent Torino's vehicle, the loan shark who's been pressuring Cassius. This confirms what I suspected. Your son may have told Torino about the family meeting, possibly as a way to buy himself more time to repay his debts." The implications were terrifying. If Cass had involved dangerous criminals in our family situation, the stakes had just escalated far beyond a simple inheritance dispute. What do we do? Nothing yet. But Mrs. Thornfield, I need you to understand that if Cassius is our perpetrator, he may have promised Torino a share of your inheritance in exchange for services. These people don't wait patiently for their money. That afternoon, I received an unexpected visit from Serafina. She arrived unannounced, which was unusual for my always scheduled daughter. I watched through the security cameras as she parked her Mercedes in the circular driveway and sat for several minutes, apparently gathering her courage before approaching the house. "Mom, I hope you don't mind me dropping by," she said when I opened the door. But her eyes were scanning the foyer and living room as if she were looking for something specific. "Of course not, sweetheart. Would you like some tea?" "Actually, I was hoping we could talk privately about Friday night. You sounded so serious on the phone, and I've been worried. Is this about Dad's business? Legal problems with the estate?" She followed me into the kitchen, but I noticed she was paying more attention to the surroundings than to our conversation. Her gaze lingered on the wine rack where Augustus had hidden his safe, on the office door that led to his study, on the basement entrance to the wine cellar. "Sarah, is everything all right? You seem distracted." "I'm fine, just concerned about you. Mom, if there are legal issues with Dad's estate, I can help. I have connections with probate attorneys, tax specialists, forensic accountants. Whatever the problem is, we can handle it as a family." There was something in her tone that made me nervous. She sounded like an attorney trying to control a potentially damaging situation, not like a daughter offering support. "That's very thoughtful, but I think it's better if we wait until Friday when everyone's here." Sarah's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Mom, if this is about money, you need to understand that delays can be costly. Estate issues have time-sensitive elements. If there's a problem with Dad's will or the inheritance structure, waiting could jeopardize everyone's financial security." The way she emphasized everyone's financial security made my skin crawl. Was she threatening me?
I appreciate your concern, but my mind is made up. Friday evening, we'll discuss everything. After she left, I found Elena reviewing the audio recording of our conversation. She's probing for information about what you've discovered. The questions about legal problems, the emphasis on time sensitivity, she's trying to determine if you found evidence that could implicate her. Do you think she suspects that I know about the poisoning?
I think she knows you found something significant, and she's trying to gauge how much danger she's in. The fact that she came here unannounced suggests she's becoming desperate for information. That evening brought an even more disturbing development. Maximilian called at nearly midnight, claiming he was concerned about my safety. Mom, I know this sounds paranoid, but I've been thinking about you alone in that big house. With Dad gone, maybe you should consider staying somewhere else for a while, a hotel, or maybe with one of us. Why would I need to do that? I don't know, I just have a bad feeling. There have been break-ins in Montecito lately, and that house is so isolated. I'd feel better knowing you were somewhere safer. The concern in his voice sounded genuine, but Elena's briefings had taught me to distrust everything. Was Max trying to get me out of the house so he could search for evidence? Or was he genuinely worried that someone else might try to harm me? I'm fine here, Max. The security system is excellent, and I'm not afraid of being alone. Okay, but promise me you'll be careful. Lock all the doors, set the alarm. And Mom, if anything feels wrong, anything at all, call me immediately. I can be there in 2 hours. After hanging up, I wondered if Max's concern was real or calculated. If he was the one who'd tried to poison me, his offer to rush to my aid was either brilliant psychological manipulation or genuine guilt about what he'd done. Thursday brought the most frightening development yet. I was reviewing Augustus's files in his study when I heard footsteps on the terrace outside. It was nearly 10 p.m., and no one should have been on the property. I peered through the blinds and saw a figure moving through the shadows near the pool area. My heart hammering, I called Elena's emergency number. There's someone outside. They're moving toward the house. I see them on the thermal cameras. It's Cassius. He's alone, and he appears to be trying to access the house through the back entrance. I watched my youngest son creeping through the gardens like a burglar. He was wearing dark clothes and moving carefully to avoid the motion sensor lights. When he reached the French doors that led from the terrace into the living room, he produced something from his pocket that looked like lock-picking tools. Elena, he's trying to break in. We're watching. Don't confront him. If he gets inside, stay hidden and let us handle it. I crept upstairs to the master bedroom and locked the door, my hands shaking as I watched the security monitors on Augustus's tablet. Cass had managed to disable the alarm system, something that should have been impossible without the master code, but somehow he'd bypassed it and was now inside the house. I watched in horror as my youngest child moved through the rooms like a professional thief. He went directly to Augustus's study and began searching through the desk drawers. When he found them empty, he became more frantic, tearing through filing cabinets and overturning furniture. It was clear he was looking for something specific, the evidence Augustus had gathered, the files that could implicate him in the poisoning attempt. From my hiding place, I watched Cass discover the hidden safe in the wine cellar. He stared at the digital lock for several minutes before pulling out his phone and making a call. "It's locked with a 6-digit code," I heard him whisper. "No, I tried the obvious ones. We need to get it open tonight, before the meeting tomorrow." He was talking to someone, getting instructions. When he hung up, he began systematically trying different combinations: birth dates, anniversaries, significant numbers from our family history. After 20 minutes, he gave up in frustration and called someone else. "Bring the cutting torch. We're going to have to go through the metal." My blood turned to ice. Cass was bringing someone to help him destroy the evidence, someone with professional tools and no qualms about breaking into an elderly woman's home. I called Elena again. "He's bringing someone with cutting equipment. They're going to break into the safe." "We're moving in now. Stay locked in your room until we give you the all clear." What followed was the most terrifying hour of my life. I listened to footsteps, muffled voices, and the sound of power tools from the basement. At one point, I heard shouting and what sounded like a struggle. Then, silence. Elena's voice came through my phone an hour later. "Mrs. Thornfield, it's safe. You can come downstairs." I found Cass sitting in the living room, his hands zip-tied behind his back, looking like a trapped animal. The man with him was a stranger, thin, wiry, with the kind of face that suggested a lengthy criminal record. Elena and 2 other agents were securing evidence bags full of tools and electronic equipment. Mom, Cass said when he saw me, his eyes filling with tears. I can explain everything. It's not what it looks like. What is it then, Cassius? Because it looks like you broke into my house to steal evidence of your crimes. It's not about the poisoning. I didn't poison you, Mom. I swear on Dad's grave, I would never hurt you. Elena stepped forward. Then what were you looking for in the safe? Cass's face crumpled. Money. Dad always kept emergency cash in hidden safes. I owe Vincent Torino $300,000, and if I don't pay him by Saturday, he's going to kill me. I thought maybe Dad had left cash somewhere that wasn't part of the official estate. So you decided to rob your own mother? I was desperate. I tried everything else. I can't get a loan because of my credit. The gallery is worthless. My only hope was finding something Dad had hidden away. Elena showed me the evidence they'd collected. The tools they brought could have been used to access any safe in the house, not just the wine cellar. If we hadn't interrupted them, they would have eventually found Augustus's evidence. I stared at my youngest son, trying to reconcile this desperate criminal with the sweet boy who used to crawl into my lap when he had nightmares. Cass, if you didn't poison me, then why were you so interested in destroying evidence about it? Because I knew it would look bad. The chemical purchase, my debts, the timing, I knew it made me look guilty. But Mom, I bought that poison for the gallery. We had a rat problem in the storage area, and the regular pest control wasn't working. I never used it for anything else. Then where is it now? Cass's face went pale. I gave it to Sarah. She said she needed it for a case she was working on. Something about environmental contamination evidence. She took the whole container about a week before your birthday. The room fell silent. Even Elena looked surprised by this revelation. Serafina asked you for poison? She said her law firm was building a case against a company that had illegally disposed of toxic chemicals. She needed samples of various substances to test their detection methods. It seemed legitimate. Sarah always handles environmental litigation. Elena exchanged glances with her agents. Mrs. Thornfield, this changes things significantly. If Cassius gave the poison to Serafina, and she had it in her possession during your birthday dinner? But she didn't have access to my food, I said, trying to remember the sequence of events from that night. Sarah brought appetizers, but they were already prepared when she arrived. She didn't help with the main course or dessert. Mom, Cass said quietly, Sarah did help with dinner. Don't you remember? She insisted on making the salad dressing fresh because she said store-bought was too processed for your birthday. She spent 20 minutes in the kitchen mixing oil and vinegar and herbs. The memory came flooding back. Sarah had made a big production about creating proper salad dressing from scratch, claiming that my usual ranch dressing wasn't sophisticated enough for the occasion. She'd been alone in the kitchen for nearly half an hour, and everyone had commented on how delicious the salad was. Oh my God, I whispered. The salad. She poisoned the salad dressing. Elena was already on her phone, calling for backup and issuing instructions about increased surveillance on Serafina. Mrs. Thornfield, we need to cancel tomorrow's family meeting. If Serafina realizes that Cassius has been caught breaking into your house, she'll know we're closing in on her. No, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. We go ahead with the meeting, but now we know who we're really dealing with. Elena stared at me. It's too dangerous. Serafina is a lawyer. She's smart, ruthless, and she's already tried to kill you once. If she feels cornered, she might try to eliminate all the witnesses. Then we'll be ready for her. You said yourself that killers can't resist the opportunity to control the narrative. If we cancel now, she'll disappear, and we'll never get the proof we need for a conviction. Elena considered this. There would have to be extensive security measures, body cameras, armed agents in concealment, immediate arrest capability. And Mrs. Thornfield, you'd be putting yourself in extreme danger. I looked at Cass, still zip-tied and ashamed, and thought about the daughter I'd raised to be strong and independent. Serafina had grown up in this house, learned right from wrong at my kitchen table, been taught to value family above everything else. And she'd repaid that love by trying to poison me at my own birthday celebration. She's not going to get away with it, I said. I want her to look me in the eye and admit what she's done. I want her to explain how she could watch me dying in agony, knowing she caused it. Elena nodded slowly. All right, but we do this my way, with full tactical support. And Mrs. Thornfield, once we start this confrontation, there's no going back. Your relationship with Serafina will be over forever. It was over the moment she decided to kill me. As Elena's team prepared to transport Cass and his accomplice to a safe house for further questioning, I sat alone in the living room where I'd raised 3 children. The house felt different now. No longer a warm family home, but a crime scene where trust had been murdered along with everything else. Tomorrow night, I would face my daughter across the dinner table where she'd tried to kill me. I would look into her eyes and see not the little girl who used to help me bake cookies, but a cold-blooded killer who had calculated that my death was worth more than my love.
The trap was set. Serafina would come to the meeting expecting to control the situation, to deflect suspicion onto her brothers, to maintain the facade of being a grieving daughter concerned about her mother's well-being. Instead, she would find herself confronted with the evidence of her betrayal and the consequences of her choices. For the first time since learning about the poisoning attempt, I felt something other than fear and confusion. I felt angry. Serafina had used my unconditional love as a weapon against me, exploiting the trust that should have been sacred between mother and daughter. She thought she was smarter than everyone else, that her legal training and cold calculation made her untouchable. Tomorrow night, she would learn that some things were more powerful than cleverness and cruelty. A mother's determination to survive and see justice done was one of them. The final confrontation was less than 24 hours away, and I intended to be ready for whatever my daughter might try. Because this time, I wouldn't be a helpless victim celebrating my birthday while someone I loved planned my death. This time, I would be the one in control. Friday morning arrived gray and overcast, with storm clouds gathering over the Santa Barbara coastline. I stood at the kitchen window watching the waves crash against the shore below our state, trying to calm my nerves with the rhythm of the ocean. In 12 hours, I would sit across from my daughter knowing she had tried to murder me. The thought made my coffee taste like ash. Elena arrived at 8 a.m. with a team of 6 agents and enough surveillance equipment to monitor a small city. They moved through the house with professional efficiency, installing microscopic cameras in light fixtures, placing audio devices behind picture frames, and setting up a command center in Augustus's study that looked like something from a spy movie. "Mrs. Thornfield," Elena said as she tested the wireless microphone I would be wearing, "I need you to understand exactly what we're dealing with. Serafina Thornfield isn't just a killer, she's a highly trained attorney who specializes in criminal defense. She knows how evidence works, how confessions can be obtained illegally, how to protect herself from prosecution." What does that mean for tonight? It means she won't confess easily. She'll try to control the conversation, redirect suspicion onto her brothers, and find ways to discredit any evidence we present. We need to be smarter than she is. Elena spread out a detailed floor plan of the house on the kitchen table. Red dots marked the positions of hidden agents, while blue lines showed the routes they would take if they needed to intervene quickly. Agent Morrison will be in the wine cellar, positioned behind the equipment room where he can hear everything. Agent Chen will be in the garage with a clear view of all exits. Agent Rodriguez will be on the roof with a sniper rifle, just in case Serafina brought backup we haven't detected. The mention of a sniper rifle made my stomach clench. Do you really think she's that dangerous? Mrs. Thornfield, your daughter has already attempted murder once. She's desperate, intelligent, and facing life in prison if we can prove her guilt. People like that are capable of anything. Elena handed me a small device that looked like a hearing aid. This is a panic button. If you feel threatened at any point during the dinner, press it and we'll move in immediately. Don't try to be a hero. Our job is to keep you alive and get the evidence we need for a conviction. The morning was spent rehearsing different scenarios. What if Serafina arrived early and tried to search the house? What if she brought a weapon? What if she tried to poison me again during dinner? Elena's team had contingency plans for every possibility, but I could see the concern in their eyes.
They were asking a 70-year-old woman to confront a killer, and they knew how easily things could go wrong. At noon, I received a call from Maximilian that made everyone in the command center freeze. "Mom, I've been thinking about tonight, and I'm worried. Maybe we should postpone the family meeting. I have a bad feeling about bringing everyone together right now." Elena grabbed my arm and pointed to her headset, indicating that Max's call was being recorded and analyzed in real time. "Why would you want to postpone it?" I asked. "I don't know. Something feels off. Cass didn't answer his phone last night, and when I drove by his gallery this morning, it was closed with no explanation. And Sarah has been acting strange all week, more paranoid than usual, asking weird questions about family finances and legal procedures." My heart raced. If Max had noticed that Cass was missing and Sarah was behaving suspiciously, how much did he know about what was really happening? "Max, is there something you're not telling me about your brother and sister?" There was a long pause. "Mom, I think one of them is in serious trouble. The kind of trouble that could affect the whole family. Maybe we should handle this privately before involving everyone in a group discussion."
Elena was frantically typing on her computer, pulling up surveillance reports on Max's recent activities. She showed me a screen that made my blood run cold. Max had been to a gun store that morning and purchased a concealed carry pistol. "Max," I said carefully, "are you planning to bring anything to dinner tonight that I should know about?" "Just my appetite and hopefully some good news about my latest project." "Mom, are you sure you're okay? You sound nervous." After hanging up, Elena called an emergency briefing with her team. "This changes everything. If Maximilian suspects that Serafina is the killer, he might be planning to take justice into his own hands. We could have two dangerous people at that dinner table tonight." "But Max is my son. He wouldn't hurt me." "He wouldn't hurt you intentionally. But if he's planning to confront Serafina with a weapon, you could get caught in the crossfire. Mrs. Thornfield, I'm strongly recommending we abort this operation and arrest Serafina at her office instead." I thought about the evidence we had, circumstantial at best, with Cass's testimony about giving her the poison and my recovered memory about the salad dressing. Would it be enough to convict her in court, or would her attorney skills help her escape justice? No, we go ahead as planned, but make sure your agents are ready for the possibility that Max might be armed. Elena spent the afternoon briefing local law enforcement and coordinating with the Santa Barbara Sheriff's Department. By 4 p.m., our estate was surrounded by an invisible perimeter of police officers and federal agents. Anyone approaching the house would be identified and tracked long before they reached the front door. At 5 p.m., I began preparing dinner. It felt surreal to be cooking a family meal while wearing a wire and knowing that armed agents were watching my every move. I decided to keep the menu simple: roasted chicken, vegetables from our garden, and store-bought dessert. I wasn't taking any chances with homemade food that could be tampered with. Elena had insisted that all the ingredients be purchased that morning from a store that none of my children knew about, and that I prepare everything myself under constant surveillance. Every dish would be tested for toxins before serving, and I would only eat food that came from the same serving dishes as my children. At 6:30 p.m., as I was setting the table, Serafina called. "Mom, I'm running a few minutes late. I had an emergency client meeting that went longer than expected. Is 7:15 okay?" "Of course, sweetheart. Drive safely." Elena was monitoring the call and immediately began tracking Sierra's location through her cell phone. "She's not coming from her office. She's driving up from Los Angeles, and she made several stops that don't match her story about a client meeting." "What kind of stops?" "A pharmacy, a medical supply store, and what appears to be a private laboratory. Mrs. Thornfield, I think she's been preparing for tonight. She may be planning another poisoning attempt." The thought that Sierra might try to kill me again in front of her brothers and a house full of federal agents seemed insane. But then again, attempting to murder your own mother was already insane. At exactly 7 p.m., Maximilian arrived. I watched through the cameras as he parked his Tesla and sat for several minutes, apparently psyching himself up for whatever he planned to do. When he got out of the car, I could see a bulge in his jacket that confirmed Elena's suspicions about the weapon. "Mom," he said when I opened the door, embracing me more tightly than usual. "How are you holding up? I know this week has been difficult." "I'm fine, just eager to get some family business resolved." Max looked around the foyer and living room with the same suspicious attention that Sierra had shown during her visit. But where Sierra was searching for evidence, Max seemed to be evaluating defensive positions and exit routes. "Where are Cass and Sierra?" "She'll be here soon," I lied. "You know how she is with punctuality." Max and Sierra greeted each other with the cool politeness that had characterized their relationship since childhood. They had never been close, viewing each other more as competitors than siblings. Now, watching them size each other up across the room, I wondered if Max suspected what I knew about his sister. "Should we wait for Cass or start without him? I know you said this was important family business."
Let's give him a few more minutes. Can I get you both something to drink? I served wine from a bottle that Elena had purchased that morning, making sure to pour from the same bottle for all of us. As we sat in the living room, making stilted conversation, I studied my children's faces, looking for signs of guilt or suspicion. Max kept checking his phone and glancing toward the front door, as if he were expecting trouble. Sarah appeared calm and professional, but I noticed she hadn't touched her wine and was keeping her briefcase within easy reach. "Mom," Sarah said after 20 minutes of waiting, "maybe we should start without Kaz. You said this was urgent family business, and I have an early court appearance tomorrow." "Actually, there's something I need to tell you both about Cass," I said, following the script Elena and I had rehearsed. "He won't be joining us tonight. He's dealing with some legal problems." Max straightened in his chair. "What kind of legal problems?" "He was arrested last night for breaking into the house. Apparently, he owes money to some very dangerous people, and he was looking for valuables he could steal and sell." Sarah's face showed no emotion, but I saw her fingers tighten slightly on her briefcase handle. "That's terrible. Is he all right? Has he been charged?" "He's in custody, cooperating with the authorities. But that's not why I asked you both here tonight." I stood up and walked to the mantelpiece, where Elena had positioned one of the hidden cameras with the best view of the seating area. "I asked you here because I've discovered something disturbing about my birthday dinner 6 months ago. Something that affects both of you." Max leaned forward, his hand moving unconsciously toward his jacket. "What did you find?" "I found evidence that someone tried to poison me that night. The illness that sent me to the hospital wasn't food poisoning. It was a deliberate attempt to kill me." The silence that followed was deafening. Max looked shocked and angry, his face flushing with rage. Sarah looked concerned and confused, but I noticed I detected something else underneath: calculation. "Mom, that's impossible. Who would want to hurt you? And how could you possibly know it was poisoning after all this time?" "Your father knew. He discovered it before he died and left evidence for me to find. Evidence that proves one of my children tried to murder me." Max exploded out of his chair. "What? One of us? Mom, that's insane! Who would do such a thing?" "That's what I intend to find out tonight." I walked to Augustus's desk and withdrew the 3 folders he had compiled, along with copies of the chemical purchase records and surveillance footage. "One of you is a killer, and I want to know which one." Sarah stood up slowly, her lawyer instincts taking over. "Mom, this is a very serious accusation. If you really believe a crime was committed, you should be talking to the police, not confronting your children in your living room." "Oh, but the police are already involved," I said, smiling coldly. "In fact, they're here right now."
The effect was immediate and dramatic. Mac's hand went straight to his concealed weapon, while Sarah grabbed her briefcase and took a step toward the nearest exit. "That's right," I continued. "This entire house is under surveillance. Every word you've spoken tonight has been recorded. Every move you make is being watched by federal agents who are waiting for me to identify my would-be killer." Sarah's composure finally cracked. "Mom, this is some kind of trap. You're making a serious mistake. You're accusing your own children of attempted murder based on what? Paranoid theories from a man who was dying of cancer? Based on evidence. Evidence that shows you obtained poison from Cassius. Evidence that shows you had exclusive access to the salad dressing that made me sick. And evidence that shows you've been researching inheritance law and poison detection methods." For the first time since arriving, Sarah looked genuinely afraid. "That's all circumstantial. Even if I did help Cass with pest control chemicals, even if I did research estate planning, that doesn't prove I tried to kill you." "No, I agreed. But your reaction right now is pretty convincing proof." Elena's voice came through my earpiece. "She's reaching for something in her briefcase. We're moving in." "Step away from the briefcase, Serafina," I said loudly. But it was too late. Sarah had already withdrawn a small vial of clear liquid and was advancing toward me with desperate determination. "You stupid old woman! You should have died 6 months ago and saved us all this trouble." Max drew his pistol and pointed it at his sister. "Sarah, stop! Put that down!" "Shut up, Max! You think I'm going to prison because Mom couldn't have the decency to die quietly? I've worked too hard to build my life to let her destroy it with her meddling." The front door burst open, and Elena's team flooded into the room, weapons drawn and shouting commands. But Sarah was already moving, lunging toward me with the vial raised like a weapon.
What happened next would replay in my nightmares for months to come. The sound of gunshots, Serafina's scream of rage and pain, the crash of furniture as bodies hit the floor. When the chaos finally stopped, my daughter was lying on the Persian rug that had been a wedding gift from Augustus's parents, her blood seeping into the antique fibers. She was still alive, but barely. As the paramedics worked to stabilize her, she looked up at me with eyes full of hatred and spoke the last words she would ever say to her mother. "I should have used more poison." The confession was recorded, witnessed by federal agents, and legally admissible in court. My daughter had finally told me the truth about what she'd done, and it was exactly what I'd feared to hear. Evangeline Thornfield, the daughter I'd raised to be strong and independent, was a cold-blooded killer who had tried to murder her own mother for money. The nightmare was over, but the damage to our family would last forever. The ambulance sirens faded into the distance as they rushed Serafina to Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital, the same hospital where I had nearly died from her poisoning attempt 6 months earlier. The irony wasn't lost on me as I sat in my blood-stained living room giving my statement to Detective Sarah Martinez of the Santa Barbara Police Department. "Mrs. Thornfield, I need you to walk me through exactly what happened when your daughter made her final attack," Detective Martinez said, her pen poised over a notepad that already contained pages of my testimony. "She grabbed a vial from her briefcase. Elena's team later confirmed it contained concentrated digitalis, enough to kill me within minutes if she'd succeeded in forcing me to ingest it. When I told her to step away from the briefcase, she dropped all pretense of being a loving daughter. She called me a stupid old woman and said I should have died 6 months ago." "And that's when your son, Maximilian, drew his weapon?" "Yes. Max pointed his gun at Sarah and told her to stop. I think he was trying to protect me, but the federal agents were already moving in. When Sarah lunged at me with the poison, Agent Morrison fired a non-lethal shot that brought her down." Detective Martinez nodded, consulting her notes.
The entire incident was recorded by multiple surveillance devices, so we have clear evidence of attempted murder and her confession. Combined with the evidence your husband gathered about the original poisoning, we have more than enough for a conviction. I looked around the living room where I'd raised 3 children, now marked by police tape and forensic equipment. The Persian rug where Sarah had fallen was being processed as evidence, along with the vial of poison and her briefcase full of what turned out to be detailed plans for eliminating me permanently. What happens now? Serafina will face charges of attempted murder, elder abuse, conspiracy, and possession of controlled substances with intent to cause bodily harm. Given the premeditated nature of both attacks and her confession, she's looking at life in prison without the possibility of parole. Life in prison. My daughter, the little girl who used to bring me dandelions from the garden, who I'd helped with homework and college applications, who I'd walked down the aisle at her wedding, would spend the rest of her life behind bars. Elena approached with a stack of documents. Mrs. Thornfield, we found something else in Serafina's briefcase that you need to see. She handed me a manila folder labeled Thornfield Estate Accelerated Distribution Plan. Inside were detailed financial projections showing how Sarah had planned to divide my inheritance among herself and her brothers after my death, along with forged documents that would have made her the executor of my estate. She had it all figured out, Elena explained. Your death would have looked like natural causes, an elderly woman who suffered a fatal heart attack while still recovering from food poisoning. She calculated that with her legal expertise, she could expedite the inheritance distribution and have access to the money within 6 months. But there was more. The folder contained correspondence with overseas banks, shell company registrations, and evidence that Sarah had been planning to move most of the inheritance offshore where it couldn't be traced or recovered. She wasn't just planning to kill you, Elena continued. She was planning to steal the entire inheritance from her brothers as well. They would have received token amounts while she disappeared with the bulk of the $48 million. Detective Martinez looked up from her notes. Mrs. Thornfield, do you want to press charges for the theft conspiracy as well? Press every charge possible. My daughter made her choices, and now she has to live with the consequences. As the police and federal agents finished processing the crime scene, I found myself alone with Maximilian in the kitchen. He was sitting at the breakfast table with his head in his hands, his concealed carry pistol now evidence in the custody of the FBI. Mom, I'm so sorry, he said without looking up. I suspected something was wrong with Sarah, but I never imagined she was capable of murder. When I bought that gun yesterday, I thought maybe she was planning to hurt you financially or legally. I never thought she'd actually try to poison you again. Why didn't you tell me about your suspicions?
Because I hoped I was wrong. Because she's my sister, and I didn't want to believe that someone in our family could be that evil. He finally looked up at me, and I saw tears in his eyes. When she attacked you tonight, when I saw that vial in her hand, I would have killed her to protect you, my own sister, and I was ready to kill her. I reached across the table and took his hand. Max, you did the right thing. You protected your mother from someone who was trying to murder her. The fact that person happened to be your sister doesn't change that. But it changes everything else, doesn't it? Our family is destroyed. Cass is in protective custody, Sarah will spend her life in prison, and I'll spend the rest of my life wondering how I didn't see the monster she'd become. Over the next several days, the full scope of Serafina's planning became clear through the FBI's investigation. She had been researching my murder for over a year, exploring different methods and timing options. The poisoning attempt at my birthday dinner had been carefully calculated. If I'd died that night, it would have looked like a tragic accident during a family celebration. When that attempt failed and I survived, she'd begun planning more direct methods. The vial of digitalis she'd brought to our final dinner was concentrated enough to cause immediate cardiac arrest. If Elena's team hadn't intervened, I would have been dead within minutes.
But perhaps the most chilling discovery was a series of encrypted files on Sarah's computer that detailed contingency plans for eliminating other family members if they became obstacles to her inheritance goals. She had researched Maximilian's business vulnerabilities and Cassius's criminal associates, looking for ways to arrange accidents if necessary. My daughter hadn't just planned to kill me, she had been prepared to murder her entire family for money. 3 weeks after the confrontation, I received word that Serafina had been deemed competent to stand trial and was being held without bail. Her attorney, one of the most expensive criminal defense lawyers in California, had advised her to accept a plea bargain, but Sarah was refusing to admit guilt. "She wants to take this to trial," Elena informed me during one of our final meetings. "Her lawyers think they can argue that she was mentally incompetent due to financial stress and emotional trauma from her divorce." Will that work? Not with the evidence we have. The planning was too extensive, too methodical. This wasn't a crime of passion or mental breakdown. It was calculated murder for financial gain. Elena was right. When the trial began 6 months later, the prosecution presented an overwhelming case. The jury saw the surveillance footage of Sarah's attempted break-in at my house, heard recordings of her confession, and examined the detailed murder plans found in her possession. The defense tried to paint her as a loving daughter driven to desperation by financial ruin, but the evidence told a different story. When the prosecution played the recording of her final words, "I should have used more poison," the jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning a verdict of guilty on all charges. Serafina Thornfield was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She showed no emotion when the verdict was read, and she refused to look at me throughout the entire trial. The last words she ever spoke to me remained that cruel confession in my living room. The inheritance that had started this nightmare was finally mine to claim. Harrison Blackwell guided me through the legal processes, and within 8 months of Augustus's death, I had access to the full $48 million estate. But the money felt tainted now, earned through the destruction of my family and the discovery that one of my children was a killer. I kept enough to maintain the Montecito estate and ensure my financial security for the rest of my life. The remainder went to various charities, with a significant portion establishing the Augustus Thornfield Foundation for Elder Abuse Prevention. If my story could help protect other families from similar betrayals, then at least some good would come from our tragedy. Maximilian used his portion of the inheritance to pay off his debts and restart his technology company on more solid footing. He moved back to Santa Barbara to be closer to me, and we began the slow process of rebuilding our relationship. The experience had changed him, made him more thoughtful, more aware of the importance of family bonds that went beyond financial considerations. I keep thinking about the signs I missed. The way Sarah became more calculating after her divorce, how she always steered conversations toward money and inheritance, how she seemed to view every relationship as a transaction. We all missed the signs because we loved her and wanted to believe the best about her. Cassius was released from protective custody after testifying against his sister. The experience had been traumatic for him. Learning that the person he trusted with deadly chemicals had used them to try to murder their mother. He closed his gallery and entered a rehabilitation program to deal with his gambling addiction and financial irresponsibility. "I gave her the poison," he said during one of his visits to the estate. "I handed my sister the weapon she used to try to kill you. How do I live with that?" You live with it by making better choices going forward. You couldn't have known what she was planning. The guilt belongs to her, not to you.
With both of my surviving children, I had to rebuild relationships that had been damaged by suspicion, investigation, and the revelation that one of us was capable of murder. It wasn't easy. There were moments when I looked at Max or Cass and wondered what they might be capable of if pushed to desperation. There were times when they looked at me and seemed to remember that I had orchestrated a trap that nearly got their sister killed. But we worked through it, slowly and carefully. with the help of family counselors and the knowledge that we were all victims of Serafina's choices. A year after the trial, I received an unexpected visitor. Vincent Torino, the loan shark who had been threatening Cassius, appeared at my front gate with a proposal. "Mrs. Thornfield, I think we got off to a bad start," he said, when I agreed to meet with him in the presence of my security team. "Your son Cass has been making regular payments on his debt since getting out of custody. He's a good kid who got in over his head. What do you want, Mr. Torino?" "I want to forgive the remaining balance on his debt. Call it a gesture of respect for a family that's been through enough tragedy." I stared at this man who had threatened my son's life and helped him break into my house. "Why would you do that?" "Because I got kids too, Mrs. Thornfield. And after what happened with your daughter, after seeing how money can turn family against each other, I don't want any part of causing more pain to people who are trying to put their lives back together." It was an unexpected mercy from an unlikely source. Cassius cried when I told him about Torino's gesture, and it marked a turning point in his recovery process. 2 years after Augustus's death, I finally felt ready to make peace with what had happened to our family. I was 72 years old, living alone in a house that had been both a crime scene and a place of healing. The gardens had been replanted, the living room redecorated, and most traces of that terrible night had been erased. But I kept Augustus's study exactly as he'd left it, including the hidden safe in the wine cellar. It served as a reminder of the man who had loved me enough to protect me even after his death, and of the investigation that had saved my life. On a quiet Sunday morning in October, I sat in the breakfast nook reading the newspaper when my phone rang. It was Elena Vasquez, who had become something of a friend in the aftermath of the case. "Mrs. Thornfield, I wanted you to know that Serafina has been transferred to a maximum security facility in Colorado. She'll never be eligible for parole, and she'll never have another opportunity to hurt you or anyone else." "How is she doing?" "According to the prison reports, she's adapted well to incarceration. She's working in the law library, helping other inmates with their appeals. She shows no remorse for what she did, but she's not causing trouble either." It was strange to think of my daughter living out her days in a concrete cell, using her legal skills to help criminals while showing no regret for trying to murder her own mother. But perhaps that was the most honest version of who Serafina had always been. Someone who could compartmentalize her actions and move forward without emotional consequences. That afternoon, Maximilian and Cassius came for Sunday dinner, a tradition we'd established as part of rebuilding our family relationships. We ate on the terrace overlooking the ocean, in the same spot where Sarah had poisoned me 3 years earlier. "Mom," said Max as we finished dessert, "I've been thinking about what Dad wrote in his letter. About not trusting anyone until you knew the truth. What about it?" "I think he was wrong about the second part, but right about the first part. Not trusting anyone would have been a terrible way to live, but finding the truth, that was the only way any of us could move forward." Cassius nodded in agreement. "If you hadn't investigated, if you just tried to forget about the poisoning, Sarah would have tried again, and eventually she would have succeeded." They were right. Augustus's investigation and my decision to pursue the truth had been painful and destructive, but they had also been necessary. Without them, I would have lived in fear for the rest of my life, or I would have died at the hands of someone who should have loved me unconditionally. As the sun set over the Pacific, I looked at my 2 surviving children and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Genuine peace. We had been through the worst possible family crisis and emerged with our love for each other intact. Not unchanged, we would never again have the innocent trust we'd once shared, but stronger in some ways because we'd chosen to rebuild rather than walk away. "There's something I want to tell you both," I said as we cleared the dinner dishes. "I've decided to establish a trust fund that will ensure your financial security for the rest of your lives, regardless of your business successes or failures.
But the money comes with conditions. They exchanged worried glances, probably remembering the conditions that had started this entire nightmare. "What kind of conditions?" Max asked carefully.
You have to stay in therapy. You have to maintain regular contact with each other and with me. And if either of you ever develops the kind of financial desperation that could tempt you to harm someone else, you have to ask for help immediately. Cass smiled sadly. Mom, after what we've been through, I don't think either of us will ever take family for granted again. He was right. The experience had taught us all that love without trust is meaningless, but trust without verification can be deadly. We had learned to balance our emotional bonds with practical safeguards, our desire to believe the best about each other, with the knowledge that people are capable of terrible choices when pushed to extremes. 3 months later, I received a letter from Serafina. It was the first communication I'd had from her since the trial, and I debated for days whether to read it. Mother, I've been thinking about what happened, and I want you to understand why I did what I did. You raised me to be strong and independent, to go after what I wanted and not let anyone stand in my way. That's exactly what I was doing. You and Dad controlled all the money, all the power in our family. You made decisions about our futures based on your own comfort and convenience, not on what was best for us. I was taking control of my own destiny. I'm not sorry for what I did. I'm only sorry that I failed. You got to live your whole life on your terms, with every advantage money could provide. Why shouldn't I have had the same opportunity? Don't expect me to apologize for wanting what was rightfully mine. Serafina. I read the letter 3 times before burning it in the fireplace. Even in prison, even after losing everything, my daughter remained unrepentant and self-justifying. She had learned nothing from the destruction she'd caused, felt no genuine remorse for the pain she'd inflicted. But in a strange way, the letter gave me closure. It confirmed that I had made the right choice in pursuing the truth, in refusing to enable her behavior, and in ensuring that she could never hurt anyone again. 4 years after Augustus's death, I was sitting in his study reviewing foundation paperwork when I found a letter he'd written to me that I'd somehow missed during the original investigation. It was tucked inside one of his medical journals, sealed in an envelope marked, "For Evangeline, if I was wrong." My dearest wife, if you're reading this, then you've completed the investigation and discovered the truth about who tried to kill you. I pray that you found the strength to see it through, regardless of how painful the revelation might have been. If I was wrong about one of our children being the perpetrator, then I apologize for putting you through this ordeal unnecessarily. But if I was right, then you now know which of them was willing to murder their own mother for money. Either way, you deserve to know that you were the greatest love of my life, the best decision I ever made, and the strongest person I've ever known. Whatever you discovered about our family, whatever choices you had to make to protect yourself, I want you to know that I'm proud of you. Live the rest of your life without fear, without regret, and without looking over your shoulder. You've earned the right to peace and happiness. I love you eternally, Augustus. I held the letter for a long time, feeling the weight of everything we'd been through as a family. Augustus had been right about the threat, right about the investigation, and right about my ability to survive the truth. Most importantly, he'd been right that I deserved to live without fear. Now, at 73, I wake up each morning in the house where I nearly died, surrounded by memories both terrible and beautiful. I tend the gardens where my children once played, cook meals in the kitchen where one of them tried to poison me, and sleep peacefully in the bedroom where I once planned their confrontation. The $48 million inheritance that started this nightmare
has become a tool for helping other families avoid similar tragedies. The foundation provides resources for detecting elder abuse, supports law enforcement training in financial crimes against seniors, and offers counseling for families dealing with inheritance-related conflicts. Maximilian and Cassius visit regularly, and we've built new traditions to replace the ones that were tainted by Serafina's betrayal. We don't gather for birthday dinners anymore, too many painful associations, but we meet for Sunday lunches, holiday brunches, and quiet evenings when we need to remember that family bonds can survive even the worst betrayals. Sometimes people ask me if I regret pursuing the investigation, if I wish I'd simply accepted Augustus's death and lived with the uncertainty about the poisoning attempt. The answer is always no. Learning the truth was devastating, but it was also liberating. I would rather live with painful knowledge than comfortable lies. My daughter Serafina tried to kill me for money, showed no remorse for her actions, and would have succeeded if given another opportunity. Those are the facts, and I've made peace with them. I'm still here, I'm still strong, and I'm still surrounded by people who love me genuinely rather than for what they can gain from me. And that's more than many people can say at 73. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever discovered that someone close to you was not who you thought they were? Comment below and tell me what city you're watching from. Thank you for following my journey from beginning to end. Remember that sometimes the people closest to us are capable of the greatest betrayals, but that doesn't mean we should stop trusting or loving. It just means we should trust wisely and love with our eyes open. If you want to see more stories about finding strength in impossible family situations, check out these videos that will definitely surprise you.